So how has your first couple weeks of the new year, new month been? I still feel on a good, I feel good. I guess I feel momentum. I don't feel so, oh my God, new year, new me. But I'm sure after the retrograde, things will feel a lot like, oh, new vibes, you know? Because it's Venus retrograde right now. And I think at the time of this podcast going up, Mercury will be retrograde. So y'all know the deal. Venus, we already talked about Venus retrograde, I think, in a recent podcast because it's been retrograde since December. But Venus is the planet of love, relationships. So when that's retrograde, we're going to be reevaluating our values and things around those aspects of our life. So when Mercury is retrograde, Mercury is the planet of communication, technology, things like that. So when it's a retrograde, the planet appears to be traveling backwards around the Earth. So we might have difficulties or troubles, or just it might feel a little annoying. Things might not flow as smoothly. Things related to communication, you might get the date wrong of something. Old people or just circumstances may come up, old issues, and you may be reevaluating them or gain a new perspective. And especially, y'all know on Instagram, especially, I talk all the time, not all the time, but I'll be like, oh, did you guys have any TBTs come back? Which TBTs have come back this retrograde? Something I've read this once. I have definitely said this before, but I think it's just a good reminder for these retrograde time of years. Just because somebody comes back into your life, that doesn't mean that's a sign that they need to be in your life again. Sometimes I feel like people come back, or even if it's a new person, but they have a lot of the same traits as an ex, or someone who used to be friends with, or someone who's no longer in your life, it can be an opportunity to reevaluate, okay, well, what attracted me to this person, or why didn't this work out, or whatever. And I mean, that's not to say that it's always going to be a no. Sometimes you may, I don't know, you might realize something and maybe you do end up back together and decide to give it another shot. But just being sure that you're being reasonable. Don't get back with a dumb ass, okay, bitch? I'm watching you. So yeah, also just on the topic of that, y'all know I've talked a lot on this podcast about boundaries and really sticking up for yourself, learning how to stick up for yourself and put your own needs and wants first. And I think this example, or this topic, is a really great example of that. If anybody, but just because someone wants to be in your life again, that doesn't mean that you have to agree or be okay, yeah, let's reconvene, let's give it a shot. And I know a lot of the times, at least for me, but I know a lot of people will relate, it's not when faced with a situation like this, it's not I will consciously be thinking, well, they want me back in their life, I don't, but I'm going to put their needs before mine and give it a shot. So often it shows up in ways oh, well, I know for me, this has happened multiple times. Someone will ask me out, or I don't know, want to take me on a date, and I don't feel 100% about them, but I've kind of realized that my brain will disguise, I don't know, maybe discomfort, or I'll basically talk myself out of feeling oh, this is a no. I'll be well, what if this is, meant to be? Or am I being too picky? There's no harm in just giving them a shot. Or what's the harm of just going on one date? But my original gut feeling was I'm not really interested in them. But it just wasn't almost loud enough for me to really pay attention to it. And sometimes you go on the date and it's fine, but then later on, it's I'll realize, oh, there was actually this little red flag, or oh, I just didn't honestly really like them, or they're actually kind of annoying, or oh, they have actually some major red flags, So for me, a big thing has been picking up on the little cues my brain gives me. If I start thinking oh, well, what if I think later down the line, like, oh my God, I'm so glad I had gone on that date when I didn't want to at first. Like, it's like, well, do you actually, is that an actual concern or fear of yours? Or are you just uncomfortable to tell them no and like you actually don't feel the same way as them, you know? So just kind of checking in with yourself. And same for if a TBT just reaches out and is like, hey, how have you been? Or like just tries to come back in your life some way and, you know, I don't know, maybe you know they're not the person for you, you know they're a bad person, maybe they're toxic, you don't need to reply. Like, you don't owe them anything, because sometimes I would, if someone came back, I would be like, well, I want to be polite, I don't just want to not reply, so I'll just be like, I'll just be dry, I just won't like really engage, but I'm still gonna reply. And it's like, that's still putting energy into it, so you can just honestly not reply. If you don't feel like replying, you don't have to reply. And that is like truly being honest with yourself. And obviously take this with a grain of salt, and like every situation is different, and maybe sometimes the best thing to do is like hear somebody out. But I know especially a lot of the time with straight men that maybe you once dated or had a situation with, or even a relationship, a lot of the times I feel comfortable saying a blanket statement of like, just if you don't want to reply, don't reply.